We're in Genesis, and as Bob said, today's message is kind of odd, but really interesting in 1,000 different ways. But I need to set a context for it first. Normally, when we look at Genesis, we think it's all about contemplating the creation of the world, like this woman in this really awesome graphic animation. I just really love it. You know, yeah, see the curtains are moving, and her hand behind the globe is kind of making. Did you see that? Ah, yeah, and even the reflection in the mirror of the globe. I didn't do this, I stole it. But anyway, we think classically the whole idea about Genesis, especially the first 10 or 11 chapters, is it's all about the creation of the world. It is in the first couple chapters, but then it quickly moves into the problem with man that comes after man is created, and the problem that he creates himself, and how the entire world sort of goes downhill after that, and it gets us into this deep hole of rebellion, separation from God. And that's really what the first 11 chapters are about. It paints the picture for this deep hole we're in. So let me just show you that, because it's fascinating to get this context. Here's the entire outline of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. You ready for this? It starts out with God, and he does a creation. And in that creation, there's this promise that the creation can come back and be with God. That's the Sabbath promise because of what God has done in creation. And then that's the idea, is this creation then lives and enjoys God. That's the paradise of being in the garden with walking in the cool of the day. And that was really what it was all about. God having creatures who would come to love him and to enjoy him. And by the way, the Sabbath idea in other parts of the New Testament, it's interpreted for us. It says, well, you know, God's the one who stopped his working, and we ought to also stop ours for the purpose of what? To enjoy one another, to enjoy life with God. That's the promise right there. But something tragically happened. There was a rebellion. And that was the fall that happens in the garden. The rebellion is to turn away from God and say, basically, I don't need you. And in fact, I want to be in your place. That's what Satan's promise is. You'll be like God. And then as the story of the Bible goes on, we find that there's a rescue, which you use all these other R words for, where we're redeemed, which means there's a cost paid. We're reconciled, which means the relationship is fixed. We're recreated, which means our creation is somehow fundamentally rechanged. That's the reborn part. And then you come to rest, and you're with God again. So in Revelation, the idea is that everything is fixed in this downward spiral and come back up. Everything is fixed, and now we're back enjoying the presence of God. That's the whole Bible, Genesis to Revelation. The problem is, if you skip the first 10 chapters and 11 chapters of Genesis, you miss the fact that humanity is in a bad way. You miss the fact that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, according to Paul. You miss the fact that the original intention of creation was for God's creatures, us, to enjoy him, and we basically stiff-armed him and said, don't want none of that. Don't want that. Now, you know, the fall in the garden was done by Adam and Eve. And what they did was they made it so that we are all now tragically bent in our nature to inevitably sin. We will be judged for our own sins, but because of what Adam and Eve did in the garden, we are inevitably sinners ourselves. That's what happened in the garden. And that's a problem with mankind that's well defined in these first 10, 11 chapters. If you don't have this fall in the first 10, 11 chapters of Genesis, there is no need for a rescue. And the rescuer is Jesus. There's no reason for him to exist in the rest of the Bible. So this is the story of the Bible, the fall of man, and how God initiates a rescue for us when we can't rescue ourselves. And the purpose and the end goal? Fellowship with God. See, it's so simple. If someone says, what's the Bible about? Psh, you've got it. Now, as we continue on today, there's an interesting thing that happens. While we're in this rebellion section, which is where we are right now, I mean, Adam and Eve have eaten the fruit. Cain has killed Abel. I mean, it's really a downward spiral of this rebellion. While we're here, somehow we get this echo of the rescue that's to come. And God has left little tidbits for us to let us know a rescue is coming. And let me demonstrate it. We've seen some already. Right over here back in Genesis 3, remember this? This is God speaking to the serpent who had deceived Adam and Eve. And I will put enmity, that's like warfare, I'll put enmity between you and the woman, so between the serpent and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, he shall bruise you on the head and you shall bruise him on the heel. We saw that when we came through 3, and of course you read that and you go, what? Let me just stop and think for a second. What he's saying, a time is coming, Mr. Serpent, a time is coming when the seed of this woman, which happens to be someone from mankind, a human being, The seed of this woman will be against your seed, will be against you. Someone will come out of humanity, basically, be a real human, and the issue is he'll bruise you on the head, which actually in warfare terms is a mortal wound. He will put you down. His sword will hit you on the ear. You're going to be finished by this one who will come out of this woman. And then lastly, but you'll get a chance to kind of bruise him on the heel, which is like an inconsequential wound when it comes to warfare. So the picture is, and the rabbis have taught this for a long time, one is coming who will be the ultimate victor over the one who deceived mankind in the garden. But this deceiver will think he has a chance to take down his adversary. He'll be able to bruise him just a little bit on the heel, but in the end, it won't do anything. He's going to overcome him. And of course, as we look way forward in history, what is that bruising on the heel that Satan the serpent has done against this one Redeemer Savior? He killed him on the cross. Did that last? 3 days. That's the bruising on the heel. But Satan himself is taken down. So here we have this glimpse in Genesis 3. While the whole world is falling apart and everyone's being deceived by Satan and it's all just going to hell, literally, here's this glimmer of hope. Something's going to change, and it's going to come out of the seed of the woman. Okay? So there's a little hint there. There's another hint that comes up. Right here. Genesis 4. To Seth, we saw this last week. To Seth, this is the son of Adam. To Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. And then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So there's this glimmer of hope as we're in this huge downward spiral, because we looked at Cain's family, remember that, and all the way down to Lamech, and just ugliness and horrible, prideful rebellion against God. And then there's this wonderfully hopeful line. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. And they were in this rebellion state, but then they changed their mind and said, rebellion from God, bad deal. I'll call upon the name of the Lord. And the name, by the way, name is reputation. I'll call upon the reputation and character of who he is. I'll call on him because I'm needy. That's what's going on. Somewhere in this line of these generations coming after Seth, something's going to switch. So we already have, as we've gotten to this nasty part of Genesis, a couple glimmers of hope. And then today, there's one gigantic glimmer of hope in Genesis 5. All of Genesis 5 is dedicated to a gigantic glimmer of hope. So while we're in the earliest parts of the narrative of the Bible about how man has fallen and has been separated from God and a reconciliation is needed, a redemption, a payment is needed, here comes chapter 5, which if you just read it quickly, you go, what was that? So we're just going to try and do that. So here we go. This is how chapter 5 starts out. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day when God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. And he created them male and female, which, by the way, means that male and female are both in the likeness of God. Guys. Okay? Both in the likeness of God. And he blessed them and named them man. Both are actually named man in a generic sense, not in a gender sense. Get off it. Okay? So there we are, both named man in the day when they were created. And then he goes on. So he's kind of giving us a recap of the story to this point. And then he says in verse 3, and when Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness, according to his image, and he named him Seth. Then the days of Adam after he became the father of Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. 930 years. I'd go for that. Or would I? I don't know. It depends on what he looked like when he got to be 930. But the interesting point, we'll see this as this goes on in a second, they lived a lot longer near the beginning of creation, a lot longer than we do now. What can you discern from that? I don't know. You can talk about speculative issues on that for a long time, but maybe there's something, and this is the key speculation, maybe there's something about the damage that was done to mankind at the fall that shortens lifespan. So anyway, we'll just keep moving. Here we go. Well, after this, verse 6, Seth lived 105 years and became the father of Enosh. And then Seth lived 807 years after he became the father of Enosh. And he had other sons and daughters, not named here. And so all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Well, okay, this is really fascinating. Well, Enosh lived 90 years, became the father of Kenan. And then Enosh lived 815 years after he became the father of Kenan, and he had other sons and daughters. And so all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. Well, Okay. Isn't this riveting? Verse 12, Kenan lived 70 years and became the father of Mahalalel. Say that slowly, Mahalalel, okay? And then Kenan lived 840 years after he became the father of Mahalalel, and he had other sons and daughters. And so all the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. Mahalalel lived 65 years, became the father of Jared. And then Mahalalel lived 830 years after he became the father of Jared, and he had other sons and daughters, during that time. And so all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. Oh, it gets better. Jared lived 162 years and became the father of Enoch. And then Jared lived 800 years after he became the father of Enoch, and he had other sons and daughters. And so all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. So far, the winner in terms of lifespan is Jared, 962. Okay, if you're keeping notes or anything like that. Verse 21, now Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. Then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. He never died. That's why he never got to be 900, because God said, you're with me, and took him. Interesting. Okay. We move on. Verse, where are we at? 25? 25, Methuselah. He lived 187 years, became the father of Lamech, and then Methuselah lived 782 years after he became the father of Lamech, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Methuselah were, here's the winner, 969 years, and he died. By the way, he has the record in the whole Bible for the oldest guy. Old as Methuselah. That's why. There he is. 969 years, and he died. But there's more. Here we go. We go into verse 28. Lamech lived 182 years and became the father of a son. And now he called his name Noah. Yay, we know this guy. Saying, this one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed. And then Lamech lived 595 years after he became the father of Noah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. Finally, Noah was 500 years old, and Noah became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So this is a preview to a rescue? This is a hint of the rescue that's to come from the redemption of man? Well, yeah. Let's take a look. He gives us a clue what to do. Remember in verse 29, as we were reading really fast, he said, now he called his name Noah, saying, this one will give us rest. So he explains to us and kind of grabs our attention while we're falling asleep in these genealogies. By the way, he called him Noah because he's going to give us rest. In Hebrew, Noah means rest. This is a clue. This is a clue. He's trying to tell us don't fall asleep in this genealogy because he's telling us Noah means rest. He gave us another clue earlier about another name. Back in Genesis 4, and named him Seth, for she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel. He was the replacement for Abel, who his brother Cain had killed. So the meaning of Seth is appointed, or, lined up, or that's the plan. It's the plan. It's the appointment. He's appointed for that. So he's already given us two ways while we were falling asleep with these names, saying, this is why he's called this, because this is what this name means. And remember, names always mean something in these ancient writings. For us, my name is James, formally. That won't tell you anything about who I am, right? But James, actually, when you go in the translation, comes from the word that means a usurper, Jacob, that takes someone's place. But that's not who I am. But in the old days, when you named somebody, you named them based upon who they were. It was part of the natural tradition. Even in the Native American culture here, it was carried on later than for most of the rest of us who have European backgrounds. I mean, it means something. And he's saying right here, there's two names in these genealogies that mean something. So that should tweak your curiosity. I wonder what the other names mean. This is what makes this interesting. So let's do that. He's already told us to do that by giving us those clues. So let's just make a list and see what happens. So here's the names that we've already read going down this line through Seth, Adam and Seth and Enosh and Kenan and Mahalalel and Jared and Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. Okay, so good Bible students as we are, we make the list and we put the translation on the right. We already know two of them. Seth means appointed and Noah means rest. This is why I love exploring the Bible. It's sort of like in olden days when people would come across the country in the wagon trains and stuff like that, and they would wait to have a scout who would go on a horse and go way ahead and make sure the path was clear and you know where the wells and the waters are and stuff, and then he'd come back and tell you, well, I'm kind of the scout. I've gone ahead for you today, and we're all in the wagon train together. We're going to discover this weird country right here of these names, okay? So let's see what happens. This is the exploring part of the Bible. Those are in the order that they were born. Order that they were born, yeah. And by the way, he's giving us this chapter also because the next chapter he's going to start talking about Noah. So he needs to bridge from Seth to Noah just to let us know. But in the passing of this bridge, interesting. Well, I'm going to jump down here to, Adam. Yeah, we forgot. Adam means man, and he told us this at the very beginning. So we knew that one too. And in fact, the word Adam, when you see it in Hebrew, many times, often when he's saying man in the Old Testament, he's using the word Adam. And it's not the proper name Adam, it's just the generic name for man. So Adam means man, so we already know that. So we're going to stick that one up there too. I wanted to jump down to this guy right here, Methuselah. Whoa, Methuselah, the muth part in front means death, and the Thuselah part means shall bring. His death shall bring. That's what it means. Something about Methuselah, his death will bring something. It will happen when he dies. Very odd. So as a Bible explorer, you go, do we have any clues about Methuselah? You do some reading around, and, well, we already have these years and stuff like that. By the way, Methuselah, how old was he? Oldest guy in the Bible? Okay, 969. So somewhere when he died, when he was 969, his death brought something. Oh, this is fun. So let's figure it out. So, well, anyway, Methuselah's there. Methuselah has Lamech when he's 187. So Lamech is 187 years younger than Methuselah. And then Lamech has Noah when he's 182. So Noah is born when Methuselah is how old? This is like the bad algebra problems from junior high. You know, a train leaves a station in Chicago. How old is Methuselah when Noah's born?
600 years old.
Should just add those two. When he's born. When he's born. I know where you're going though, Jeff. I know. Yeah, don't worry about the night. Yeah, so Methuselah is 369 years old when Noah's born. So the question is, 600 years later in the life of Noah, that would, 369 plus 600 gets us 960. So what happened 600 years into the life of Noah? Because that's when Methuselah died. Methuselah dies when Noah is 600 years in the life of Noah. Questions, thinking, speculation? He tells us. When Noah was 600 years old, when the flood of water came upon the earth. So Methuselah died the year the flood came. He couldn't swim. So his name means his death shall bring. And in the bigger picture, when we just add up and do a little math, Methuselah's death brought the flood. Now, how did his father Enoch know that? We just don't know. But can you imagine somehow Enoch is given this understanding? Maybe it came from God. Probably did come from God. You need to name your son, his death shall bring. And then for the entire life of Methuselah, everyone's walking on eggshells and going to Enoch. So how's your son today? Is he okay? He's good looking, good, healthy? Whew. And we don't know what it's going to bring. His death is going to bring something ominous. For 969 years, his death, everyone's holding their breath. And it turns out, Lamech actually, he dies before Methuselah does. So, I mean, everyone's watching Methuselah because his death is going to bring something. And sure enough, the year he dies, the flood comes. Kind of cool. Coincidence? Nah, I don't think so. So let's keep going. Let's fill in the rest of these guys' names. So Methuselah means his death shall bring, and in this case, literally, it brought the flood. Let's go back up to Enosh. How about Enosh? Well, Enosh means mortal or frail. It means the condition you are when you're born. You're born to die. I mean, you start decaying the minute you start. It's this weakness, this frailty, this mortality. That's what Enosh means. Name your son He's weak and going to die. That's exactly what's
So
said
is he a
there.
sickly person?
We don't know. We know nothing else about Enosh. But that could very well have been the case. He could have come out as like a blue baby or something like that and then survived and said, that's a very weak child. I'm going to name him, you're going to die. I don't know. We don't know much more about Enosh. But that's what his Hebrew name means. Enosh has a son, and his name is Kenan, which is the word they'd use for sorrow or a dirge when someone would die. Kenan is this sort of sadness, this despair, this depression, this sorrow that comes over somebody when you die. I would hate to walk around my entire life with that name. Hi, my name is Sorrow. Get away from me. So that's who he was, Sorrow. Kenan has a son, Mahalalel, and if that name happens to look sort of like hallelujah, it's because it's pretty close. It means basically blessed God. The Mahalal means blessed, and El means God. So the blessed God. It's this praiseworthy God is what this is all about. Mahalalel is walk around saying basically God is worthy of our praise. Blessed God. That's what he is. So that's Mahalalel. After him, Mahalalel has Jared, and Jared means that something will come down. Again, kind of an ominous idea. Something will come down on who and what is it? I don't know, but it's coming down. It's coming. It's coming down. So it's really the idea that there's an inevitability of something that's going to happen, and it's going to come down from on high, which usually implies judgment. But no one was saying. That's just that's the verb that means it'll come down. So Jared shall come down. Enoch. Enoch in several places has different meanings, but the most pronounced one is teaching or explaining or giving an understanding of something. And that's what Enoch was all about. His life, well, we don't know much about his life. In fact, almost nothing. But we do know that in Hebrew, when you had a teacher would Enoch, which would mean he would teach. So that's what the Hebrew is for that. Then we have Methuselah, his death shall bring. And then finally, Lamech means despair. It's kind of like the sorrow, but even worse. It's the hopelessness of that kind of sorrow, the fact that there seems to be no future at all for you. You despair the fact that there are no options for me. It's the end. And there we have a sentence. And I'll throw in a couple of verbs and pronouns just to make it read better. But it says that man is appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down teaching that his death shall bring the despairing rest. Odd coincidence? Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know how you prearrange the names of that many generations of people to make a sentence that makes sense in the New Testament as we look backward. It's the big clue about the rescue to come. Remember, we're down in this rebellious phase at the bottom, and there's no hope for us because we've done it to ourselves and we can't pull ourselves up by the bootstrap. We should be despairing because there's no hope. There's nothing we can do to fix it. And yet God himself hints already that he will be the one who comes and redeems us. He'll be the one that will effect the rescue. And here he says that he's going to do it in person. The blessed God shall come down teaching that his death shall bring the despairing rest. Jesus was what? Brought up? Yeah. So in that sense, Jesus was spoken of in Genesis. And in fact, the Redeemer all through the Old Testament is God himself. So here we have it again. I bring that back up to show you. And so down here, man is appointed mortal sorrow. He rebelled. He basically said to God, I don't need you. I have life in and of myself. And in that rebellion, found out he started a timer clicking for his own mortality. He was going to die. He's going to die. And it tells us that explicitly. In Romans, Paul says that what they did in the garden when they rebelled brought sin, and sin brought death. And the timer started ticking on our mortality. Not a good news, by the way, and I'll reiterate that again because in some religious cultures, they think that's actually good news. That's not good news. The introduction of sin and death is not good news to humanity. But here we are in this rebellious state. Who will save us from ourselves? We chose this. We chose this. And so man is appointed mortal sorrow. That's where we are, and we chose that. And yet, the blessed God shall come down, teaching his death shall bring the despairing rest. And remember, I put up there, part of this final destination is rest. All through the entire Old Testament, when you talk about the relationship between Israel and God and between mankind in general in God, That relationship is called rest. It's called rest. Where you can, but that's why when you talk about the Sabbath, we talked about before, as a promise of relationship. You work in an agrarian culture for 6 days, you beat yourself up, and on the seventh day, you put it all down and you rest from your labors for the purpose that you can enjoy your family. You can enjoy life. You can relate to one another. Never known a farmer? You won't see him very often, you know. So this is what he's talking about. This rest idea is to put out everything aside, and now we focus on relationship. And yet Paul is appealing in Romans, actually in his other books, he's appealing and saying, I'm an ambassador. I'm an ambassador for God and for Christ. I'm begging you on behalf of them, be reconciled. Get the relationship back together. God has always had promise from the beginning of creation that our purpose was to enjoy him and to rest in enjoying him. And what did we do? Messed the whole thing up. And we came down to this rebellion, and then we were stuck. We needed to have a rescue. Someone from the outside had to come in, like you were in a jail. They had to come in and fight their way in a sense like that, and also bring us back to him. Someone else had to pay a price because now we are indebted because of our sin. Who will pay the price that we are penniless to pay? That's redemption. Redeem means to pay that price. How will we ever be reconciled? How will we be put together? Well, something has to happen with our sin. That price has to be paid for us, and then the reconciliation can happen. But we're still tarnished by the fall. Something of all creation. Something went, boop, tragically twisted in who we are. Inevitable sin. That was our destiny from the day we're born. And so God says, I'll remake you. And that's the recreation. And we talk about that in the New Testament, how the Holy Spirit does this regeneration. He remakes us, which is the key to why when Nicodemus came in the dark to Jesus and asked him, you're a great teacher, Jesus says, yeah, I am. But you know what? If you want to make it to God, you got to start over. You got to be recreated. You got to be born again. That's all he's talking about. You need to be born again. Yeah, something in that fruit really whacked us out. Yeah, and there's that testimony of these declining lifespans. It kind of gives you the idea, you know, this did something maybe physically detrimental to mankind. I mean, really, it went on a downhill plunge really quickly. So this is what it's hinting in the whole thing. And let me just bring this up. Hebrews 4, I just love this. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered his rest has himself also rested from his works as God did from his. We should go back and read all of Hebrews again. But what he's saying is that God finished his work in the creation. He's waiting for a relationship with man. And he's saying, man, if you enter that same rest, God's rest, you will have also stopped from your works.
So rest is kind of relationship.
Rest is relationship.
Not playing soccer or going.
Rest is not going, no, it's none of that. But that's the whole idea. There's this thing that you can work, be separated from the ones you love. But when you rest, you're free to enjoy the people around you. And God's saying in the Sabbath sequence of creation, remember the 6 days and then Sabbath? He's got this whole thing going. So now, on this seventh day, he's waiting for man to have fellowship with him. That's what he's waiting for. And then man comes along and says, I don't think so. Remember what Jesus said about the Sabbath? He violated, quote unquote, the Sabbath a few times according to the religious leaders. And Jesus said a remarkable thing. Now think about this in the state of the 6 days of creation and God taking a Sabbath. Jesus says, remember this, really famous.
The guy at the well.
No. Man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man.
What is that?
I forget. Have someone help me out there. I don't have the reference on top of my head. I can bring it next week. But here's the deal. Even when you take that context and you bring it out to creation itself, God works to create this creation, including man, for the purpose that he stops. And now he says, I've got this Sabbath rest. I'm done with all that stuff. I don't have to do that anymore. This day is made for man, for me and man to enjoy one another. That's what that's for. That's the whole purpose of all that. Okay, so man was not made for the Sabbath. That is, the Sabbath rules weren't something that man has to go and kind of do that. The Sabbath was made as a gift to us to put to rest all that stuff that just completely takes over our mind share and our effort, and we can go, And so really the picture from eternity of us when we come back to God is a picture of rest. It's a picture of rest. Now, did Adam and Eve have rest before they fell with God? Well, I would say they did, because there God puts them in the garden, lovely place, sticks all these trees out there with this lovely fruit. And like I said a couple weeks ago, the fruit trees even to this day remind me of the fact that there's a promise that God's saying, a time is coming, and I'll leave the hint right now, that for you, life and nourishment is going to be as easy as going. It's a lot harder than rowing and towing and all that kind of stuff. There's a time coming when God says there's rest, just like there was in the garden. And then sure enough, that's why you see the symmetry in Genesis and in Revelation. You see the tree of life in both sides. That's really where we were meant to be. So this life of God providing for us, and providing for us to such a degree that we're not distracted with other things, that we can actually enjoy the presence of God as he walks in the cool of the day. That's really what the intention of man was. But we said, no, don't want to have anything to do with that. I think I'll just do my own thing. Thanks a lot. See you later. Mortal sorrow. Mark 2:27. Excellent. Excellent. And in his saying of that, he's basically saying man wasn't meant to be the slave of the Sabbath, wasn't meant to serve the Sabbath, wasn't meant to be beat up by the Sabbath. The Sabbath was a tremendous gift of fellowship and rest with God. You can put that stuff aside. And by the way, we could spend a ton of time on the Sabbath, but even with the nation of Israel, God was very adamant about the Sabbath because he understood that the people that were supposedly of his name, they'd beat themselves up working and toiling and trying to raise crops. And if you have anyone in your family who's a farmer, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because you turn your face away from your farm for one day and the whole thing just goes to pot. I mean, you have to be vigilant to make sure that the pests don't take it down and that everything is fertilized and everything is watered. And one day off the job, boom. And what happens? You starve and your family starves. So even back during that time, this tyranny of doing the work of this ground, which God actually was part of the curse, you're going to have to work the ground to feed yourself. You can't just walk up to trees and eat fruit anymore. This is going to rule your life, but I'm giving you a gift in the midst of that curse. A day off that you can enjoy one another and you can enjoy me. And then the temptation from the agrarian farmers would say, but God, if I take a day off, what's going to happen to my crops? And God would say, hey, I'll watch over them. Well, what happens if the pests come in? They start eating those grasshoppers. And they say, hey, I'll keep them away. Well, what happens if a drought comes? I need to hand water these. No, I'll water your crops. So really the whole idea of the Sabbath was to be able to say to God, I trust you with the food on the table for my kids and me for one day. For one day I'll stop trusting in me and I'll put my whole trust in you and I'll just chill and we'll enjoy life. The Sabbath is a wonderful gift to get away from the tyranny of that curse. That's what it's all about. It was all about. And then man comes along. Let me give you one more verse. Who's our Redeemer? But God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave, for he shall receive me. If you want to do a fascinating study sometime, look at who the Redeemer is throughout the entire Old Testament. You talk to a Christian, say, who's your Redeemer? You'll say, Jesus. And that's right. That's right, because he paid the price. Whenever you see the word redeem, you have to think about a price being paid. He's our Redeemer. And yet when you look through the entire Old Testament, our Redeemer is God himself. So which is it? Is it Jesus or is it God? Yes. That's the point you find out when you start putting this together. He's the one who comes down teaching that his own death, see that right there? His own death will bring those despairing, those hopeless, rest, a hope to get up to there. He's the one that'll do it. Himself, guest appearance, God himself. The Creator fixes the problem of our own rebellion and pays the price for our own rebellion in Christ himself. God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave. That's where sin brings death, and he shall receive me. So really, on the top there, we talk about the fact that this rest is now being with God. He receives me. He brings me into his presence. So the entire picture of our problem from Genesis on is the fact that our relationship with God is all messed up. It's that relationship again. It's the relationship that's meant. We need to be reconciled. So in the end, when the Redeemer God himself fixes us, the solution, the end point is he receives us to himself. In the end. Yeah. That's right. So actually, relationship with him starts immediately. You come to faith in Jesus. You are immersed into his Holy Spirit. His Holy Spirit starts this relationship between you and him growing. But really, the whole thing, God rescued you for the purposes of receiving you to himself. If you've ever seen any of those war movies, where your compatriots are in like a Vietnamese jail. I'm seeing Sylvester Stallone. I don't know what movie this is. Was it Rambo? I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But anyway, your friends and your compatriots, they're in this jail someplace and they're being tortured and it's horrible, And so back home, you put together this rescue plan, right? This rescue plan. And you're going to do this rescue plan. You're going to go in there and you're going to take over and you're going to free these guys against all the odds. And sure enough, helicopters and guns and all that kind of thing. They go and they free them. Now, how stupid the movie would be if they freed them and said, well, we forgot to put any more seats on the helicopters. So you're out now. See you later. Bye. Enjoy Vietnam. Because the whole point is to receive them to themselves, to reestablish that relationship, for the friends to come back together again. So when God comes and rescues us, it's so that he can bring us back to himself. So when someone asks you, are you saved? You say, yes, I'm saved. You should also somehow tell them, what is it you're saved from and what is it you're saved to? Because saved means I went from this to something else. So what is it you're saved from, and what is it you're saved to? You can say on the saved from part, because of the hopelessness of the rebellion that we put ourselves in, you're saved from sin and death and the wrath of God against that. That's what you're saved from. Is that all there is? No. He freed me from that, and now he's received me to himself. I'm saved to life with God. That's the good news. That's the good news. That when we couldn't save ourselves, he came and saved us. That's the Genesis to Revelation story again. But without the first 10 chapters of Genesis, you forget about the fact that you put yourself in the rebellious prison of sin, which leads to death. There's never any wasted words in the Bible. When you get to genealogies, you think, it's a family tree thing. Well, no, there's more going on than that. Especially when you read through some of the genealogies in the New Testament, find out the very wicked and Gentile people in the line of Jesus. Oh my gosh. Yes, there's so many eye-openers. So anyway, this indeed is a preview to a rescue. He takes all of Genesis 5 with the purposes of bridging us from the descendants of Adam to get us to Noah. But in the process of getting us through this genealogy, we come to understand that God understands our situation, this mortal sorrow that we put ourselves into. That's where we are. That's the plan. That's where we're stuck. And in the midst of that, then, the blessed God comes down teaching. What's next? The blessed God comes down teaching that his death shall bring the despairing rest. Good news starts, the gospel starts in Genesis, right in the midst of the fall. And even when we move next week to the flood, thinking, wow, another tragic event, still, there's hope. Because some people got saved at a great expense to God. And later on, Peter will actually say that, in a sense, baptism is like going through the waters of that flood and being carried through to life. Peter said that. Cool connections. And since we're doing a baptism today, I figured that was the best way to segue out of this. So, there you go. So next week, chapter 6. And we'll start to understand Noah, the man whose name means rest, surprisingly, not judgment. Okay, let's pray.